This is a podcast from the people behind the world's longest running football fans podcast, the Celtic Underground. You can subscribe and listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can have a free subscription where this lands straight in your email inbox, and you can go to theceltikunderground.substack.com. You can also have a paid subscription where you get some additional content, including the In Conversation podcast every week, and the Select written, which is basically a rehash of the E-Tim's Rumour Mill, from Glen Tintin from years ago. Anyway, this is me, Harry Brady, with this week's podcast. This Sunday we have a visit of Rangers to Celtic Park. There'll be away fans there for the first time in quite some time. And so we've got Ross Hall and Andrew Smith on to preview the game. You've written a piece about it, Andrew, about the atmosphere element of it, or the principle of them. And Ross, I had some thoughts about Rangers watching their game that I want to ask you about in terms of a tactic perspective. I notice Barry Ferguson was talking tactics of teams that have somewhere between 8 and 13 players, I think, is the various systems that he likes to play in games he was talking about. So I'll start with you, Andrew. Your thoughts about the game on Sunday, just initially, what's your thoughts?
Do you know what my initial thought is? It's a bit of a left field one, a bit of a random one. But this is a chance to give Rangers another slap at Celtic Park, as they did at the start of this season. And I want it to be a certain type of slap because, and I'll put this out to you then, when was the last time Celtic won their 2 home league games against a Rangers in a season emphatically? And I mean, I'm using my criteria for emphatically is by 2 or more goals. When was the last time they both their home wins in a season against Rangers were by more than 2 goals?
Without sitting and going through every result game by game, I couldn't tell you.
Would it have been when Moussa Dembele was here?
I thought it was going to be that, Ross. But if you remember, even I think it was Murty, was it, in the Invincible season?
Oh, no, yeah, he came in and they got the draw, didn't they?
He got the draw, the Clint Hill penalty and all that, like on Lee Griffiths. And if you think back in the green and whitewash season, where they won 5 games against Rangers, 3 of them at Celtic Park, but most of them were by a single goal. Now, if I've got this right, and I hope I've got it right, and I hope that, because I couldn't believe it when I was looking up today. 1978-79 is the last time Celtic's 2 home games against the Rangers in a league season brought wins by by 2 goals or more.
I've got a good excuse not to remember that because I wasn't alive, so I'm...
No, that's fair enough. You're quite entitled to remember that. But so in that season, they started off with a 3-1 home win. And of course, they ended the season with a famous 4-2 game.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not... I mean, I know it was 4-2 and I know it was 10 men, but would you class that as an emphatic victory based on how tight the game was for the majority of the game?
I'm classing it as emphatic because I think... I agree with you because I thought even when I've found this, it's like it doesn't quite meet my kind of parameters in some respects, but it's annoyed me. It's always annoyed me, and I mean, even in my short time here, we've sat here and said that Celtic are going to do this, that, and the other to Rangers, and the last 2 games, Celtic have conceded 6 goals against this kind of shabby Rangers in the last 2 games.
The other thing on that somebody told me today, so again, I've not had a chance to verify it. Maybe it's been written down somewhere else, and it's now a well-known. By the time people listen to this, they're like, "Aye, everybody knows this," because it's been everywhere. If Brendan Rodgers wins tomorrow, Sunday, he'll be the first Celtic manager to defeat our Rangers in 6 consecutive home games. Ever.
You would think, I would imagine that would be the case because they always throw in a wobbly somewhere, doesn't it? I mean, see when you look back on it, you were alive for this, Ross, Gordon Strachan's era. Celtic used to win leagues without actually taking the lion's share of the points in the games against their only kind of title challenger. You know, they weren't dominant in the fixture in the first. He was dominant in 05, 06, with Will Gwen and all the rest of it. But he wasn't dominant in 06, 07 and 07, 08. Rangers it took more points for the 4 league fixtures than Celtic did. It's quite unusual that, but it did happen also in 10-11, if you remember Neil Lennon. You were alive for that, Ross, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Anything 80, early 80s onwards, I'm good.
Yeah. I mean, Neil Lennon, they won. I mean, they were taking Rangers to the cleaners then. They somehow contrived to lose that league with that horrible night at Inverness. But I think they won 3 out of the 4 that year. Remember the 3-0 game? Like Gary Hooper made David Weir look geriatric. Remember, he flicked the ball over his great goal.
So that's what you're hoping for, an emphatic. Ross, what's your? We'll get into the detail and the nitty gritty of it, but just in general, what's your thoughts and expectations going into it?
As per usual, I'm incredibly boring. My expectations are win. If we win well, then brilliant. But key to these games is always win. And I know that people will sort of look and go, they had their game the other night that went obviously the full distance, and some people will expect our quality to just run over them. But as Andrew's just pointed out, sometimes that, that idea that you have in your head about what should happen very rarely does in these games. So although you've said previously, and you're right, normally the dominant team does win these games.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're going to always canter them, as Andrew's pointed out. So to me, you win the game, you do it in as professional and as brutal a manner as possible in an ideal scenario. But ultimately, at the end of the day, are any of us going to care if it's a scrappy 1-0 win or if it's a 5-0 win? 5-0's nicer. When Mikkel Lustig scored his goal a couple of seasons back where he's run the entire team, a win like that's lovely. But on Monday morning, when you go into your work, you have to obviously enter into that environment more than I do because I don't live in Glasgow. But do you care if it's 1-0 or if it's, whatever it is? So to me, win well, perform as well as we can, certainly perform better than last time. And anything beyond that, I just take as a Brucey bonus, a little extra.
So Andrew, your thoughts about, first, before we get onto the pitch, your thoughts about the fact there's going to be 2,800 or 2,500, whatever the number is, 2,500 roughly, Rangers fans at the game. What's your thoughts on that? You wrote about it this week.
I did. As I say, I'd been quite happy never to see Rangers supporters at this fixture again, because I don't think it brings out the best in the Celtic support. And that's my only concern, my main concern, my only concern, really, is I want Celtic supporters to put on their best face. And I don't think they do when there's a Rangers support. Because it obviously, the whole point of the Rangers support will be to try and goad them. And we know how they'll do that. We know the kind of chance they'll do that with their F the Pope and Fenian Bees and pedos, and we know the songbook, or whatever you might call it. So, and it's, as I say, when they go low, we don't exactly go high, do we? That's not the way that this rivalry works. We're no Michelle Obamas.
No, but it's not the way football rivalry works. It's not the way football rivalry works all over the planet.
No, I know. That's what I mean. Like I understand it for that very reason. But I mean, that's like I was watching stuff today, and it was like, it's a start, but we want back up to the 7,000. That's not going to happen. And whatever people say about it's not as simplistic as people said. Rangers don't do it because like Lee Griffiths tied a scarf to the post, or they get tired of Celtic winning there and da da da. They could also sell more season tickets than the other 3 sides. So it made complete commercial sense. It was an added extra, the fact that then they could say, well, they can't give a whole end to Celtic. But
the thing about let's go and it'll be really good if we go back up to 7,500. It's an odd thing because 7,500 is actually an artificial amount at Celtic Park. it's a natural amount at Ibrox because they've got a stand and that's what it is. But at Celtic Park, we have to draw an artificial line up the middle of the Celtic end, which Lisbon Lions standards, I guess. We have to draw an artificial line up, and actually 2,500 is a natural amount. But if you follow that logic, then wouldn't it be great if we went back to the 16,000 that it used to be when the old Terracing was there? They got the whole of the Rangers end, and that took 16,000 seats, or 16,000 people standing. So, do you think? Do you think Ross supporters makes a difference to a team? I mean, so
Yes.
do you think Rangers will play better because they've got their own fans there than they would have done if they didn't?
There's no guarantee that they play better, but I do think it makes a difference. I think I understand where Andrew's coming from. And as I say, I don't live within that environment. I haven't been brought up in that environment where that hatred comes across in my everyday life. I've never had to deal with that, which I thank God for in many ways. But having experienced that, and I'm not religious. I have no interest in anything like that. But I remember the first Celtic Rangers game I went to as a sort of young adult, and I understand where Andrew's coming to in the sense of what you get drawn into. Now, I have no interest in any of that stuff. Never have, never will. But I got drawn into it. And so, as Andrew said about that raising you up or drawing or dragging you down, I would be honest and say my first experience of it dragged me into it. I found myself saying things that I probably wouldn't normally say ever, and came away kind of bemused with myself in that regard. But I do think that away fans at games just should be a thing. I don't think that all the nonsense that's went over the years gone by is just that. It's nonsense. There should always be away fans where possible at games. How much it affects teams, I would be very surprised if any team would turn around and say that they don't feel the benefit of having some sort of crowd there. I think there's been times over the last couple of years where Rangers have come to Celtic Park and I think they've been spooked at times because there's not been any crowd there. I think that having a partisan, 60,000 people screaming wildly every time a Celtic player touches ball, I think there's been times in certain games that spooked them entirely. And so I think that they will feel how much a benefit they'll feel, I don't know. But I'd be very surprised if you ever found a player who said they don't want their away fans there in any game, especially the biggest one that they'll face domestically.
So on to the game itself and the way Rangers have set up and the way Rangers have been playing under Barry Robson. So they've gone to, it seems to, I don't know who the lad was that they substituted after whatever it was, 15, 20 minutes at Kilmarnock. Don't know his name. But it seems to be since he's gone, they have gone to a back three with Tavernier as part of it. And watching I didn't watch much of the game last night. I saw the first half, but not much of the second half due to a power issue in my house. But the thing that really struck me was neither team seemed to be playing with a midfield in the Rangers Fenerbahce game last night. Seemed to be the gist of it. And then the second half, on the wee bits that I saw, Fenerbahce just had people out wide. And putting people out wide turned Rangers back three into a back five. And Rangers had even less of a midfield and were penned in. So, Ross, talk me through what Rangers are doing since Barry Ferguson, although I'm led to believe that the brains behind the operation is Neil McCann, if you can call it that. Talk me through what Rangers are doing.
Well, if you were to listen to Barry Ferguson, not Barry Robson, he'd be very upset at being called the Rangers manager. But if you were to listen to Barry Ferguson on the TV today, and I make a point, I've always said this, I never really pay that much attention to Rangers. I will see snippets from time to time, I will hear snippets from time to time, but my attention span where it comes to the Rangers is very, very slim. But if you listen to him today, he's going to play a 3-8-9, and Roxy Bear's going to be up front alongside Cyril Dessers and a ton of other people, probably Neil McCann and some others. Or he's going to revert to 7-4-5, which, who knows going to play in that. But yeah, he seems to quite like his numbers, and he seemed to quite like emphasising the fact that Rangers can play in a multitude of formations. So let's be real. They're going to play probably a variation of a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-1-2, whatever variation of it they're going to play. Probably with Czerny, and I think against Fenerbahce it was Diomande or Raskin kind of took responsibility and pressing a little bit higher. As you say, there was periods that game, much like the first leg, where there was no midfield. It was basically attack, defence, and Fenerbahce were guilty of the same. In fact, it's what killed Fenerbahce in the first game, that they basically had a non-existent midfield. So it was one ball from defence to attack, and I have to give Rangers their due. In the first leg, they were clinical. Ultimately, it's went to penalties, but effectively, it's what got them to that point. So how he will play against us, I would expect the exact same as Fenerbahce. I don't think you're going to change much in the space of 2 days between preparing for Fenerbahce and then preparing to come to Celtic Park. They will see it as, they'll never admit it, they'll see it as they're the underdog, so they're going to play in that variation, exactly what you said, where they're going to play with a 3 that'll turn into a 5. I think that they will be very, very aware of the fact that Dyson gives Tavernier an awful time at. I'm assuming that Dyson's going to start as the centre forward in this game. But, there still is that option that he'd start on the left with Ida up front. But I would assume that he will start as centre forward. So I think they're going to look to solidify around it. They can't hide from the fact that they know, and Neil McCann knows perfectly well because he's done the punditry on it over long enough, that Dyson Maeda kills Tavernier every time. So they are going to look to protect that area as much as possible. They're going to look to, so if that means playing with the 3 and playing with Tavernier on the right of the 3, so he's got less responsibility where Dyson's concerned, and they're maybe going to sort of put that emphasis on John Suter or whoever else plays at the back for them, but it was, I think
Balogun was
I
last
can't
time.
remember who the other one is. But I think they will look to protect that area, and they will look to try and force us to play deep crosses from wide areas with Kuhn and Jota, and obviously try and use the size advantage of Suter and various others, much like they did in the first leg against Fenerbahce, where they basically said, we're happy to take crosses into the box. We believe that we've got players who will deal with that, and then, we'll look to break fast. And as much as people would want to give, to say that some of their players are poor players, Czerny is a threat. He's proved that all season long. He's a threat. He's proved it in the European games. If whoever plays at left back, which I'm assuming will be Schlupp, if he lets him inside, he's a problem. If he keeps on forcing him wide, and it's easier said than done, but if he keeps on letting him cut inside and firing shots or putting crosses, he becomes a problem, especially if they're going to play on the counter, and we are going to push bodies forward. Diomande is good at putting pressure on high up the pitch, so how we deal with that was something that we struggled with at Ibrox, him and Raskin sort of putting that pressure in around McGregor, and us just being too slow and at times too obvious with how we were playing. Hopefully we'll have adapted that, but I think from the Rangers' point of view, they will just look to sit deep and counter for the entire game. I don't foresee them making any radical changes from what they did against Fenerbahce, and I think it's going to be how well and how quickly we use the ball. The speed of the ball is going to be everything for us. If we allow them to drag us down into silly fouls on the halfway line and loads of balls between McGregor and Trusty and Vickers and then back to, if that becomes the game, then we're playing into their hands. So speed of the ball will be vital, and how quickly we get to Jota can potentially McCarron if Cal McGregor doesn't play, and then obviously you want to be giving Engels as many opportunities as possible to be playing balls into the box high up the pitch, because that is something that he's exceptional at, is he has that range of passing, and I'd like to see more of that in this game, more of a range of passing, as opposed to, I know our ideals are keep the ball and keep possession, but I'd like to see us just be a wee bit more direct at times. And Engels is the perfect player for that because he does have that range.
I thought it was really interesting on that principle of us that we kicked off the second half against Hibs, who had spent the whole of the first half in a low block and ultra defensive. We did that. 2 people pass it back to Schmeichel, and he hoofed it up the park. I mean, we never do that. But that's how we kicked off the second half against Hibs on last weekend. And there was a few occasions where Schmeichel went long, particularly in the second half from it. So, Andrew, covering off them first, how do you see them playing on Sunday?
I agree with Ross. I don't think they'll deviate from this back 3 / back 5. What they may do is they may sacrifice a bit of forward intent by trying to stiffen up their midfield, almost like a diamond they could possibly go with, and then therefore you've got a kind of, you're kind of losing maybe a kind of, so it wouldn't be so much a 3-4-1-2 as a 3-5-1-1.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm beginning to sound like Barry. I'll do my John Barnes. 4 2
At,
2
le-
2 2.
at least your maths was right. You got the 3-5-1-1. That's right.
I was worried about. I was
Yeah,
worried once I started off on that. I thought, where am I going
yeah,
here?
no,
No, 3-5-1-1. I could
yeah.
see it being more of that nature.
You keep
Therefore, so you've still got your kind of three central midfielders in that system. So you're not quite as exposed. So you've got your two wing backs, you've got your three centre backs, you've got your two wing backs, then you've got your three men in the centre of the midfield. So you're no conceding that to Celtic in the sense of the greater numbers in there. And really, one of them will be asked to. And then you can if you've got the 1-1, then obviously you could even crowd the midfield area if your one can come back and be kind of cheap position, a half forward, half midfielder position. Because right now, could be wrong, but they'll just want to avoid what I want to see for Celtic. They'll want to avoid 1,000. If they come out of this with anything, even if it's a narrow defeat, then because their season is all about those two games against Bilbao. It's for Barry. This is just reputationally. Barry Ferguson. This game matters just because he doesn't want to get a real kind of embarrassment. He just wants to avoid this. Can I just keep it ticking over and seeing, which I don't think they will. I'm trying to get a bet on this afternoon. I was trying Bilbao both legs because I'm pretty convinced that's how that one will go.
So on your point about Tierney, because that was the other thing I was thinking that was quite interesting about Rangers and us comparing the two. They've got a guy on the right whose preference is to use his pace and cut inside. We have a guy on the right whose preference is to use his pace and cut inside. So there's a similarity there. But the other thing I did think was at least Jota likes to get to the goal line and Alistair Johnson likes to do the overlap on Kuhn to get to the goal line. And if you were mentioning about how Sloop and showing them inside, I don't see that they have any players who want to get to the byline. They have no natural width in their team, as far as I can see. As you say, Ross, I'm not watching them every week, so. And the other thing that Brendan Rodgers made a big deal after the game against Hibs last week of saying, look, Rangers stole our game plan last time. We won't let it happen again. And basically my understanding is, we've got Schmeichel, 4 defenders and Callum McGregor. So we've got 6 players who are in a sort of, when we've got possession in that situation, who are in a reasonably defensive position, we should be able to cope with anything because they're not going to put 6 players on top of our 6 players, and we should be able to cope. And it's only been slack balls that have caused problems for us. And we've dealt with it by bringing Engels back. Really interesting, I think, in the last couple of games when Callum's had to go off injured and Engels has gone to the number 6 position. He's played, as you identified before, Ross, he's played much more of the longer diagonal passes into space. So Callum didn't train today. What do you think our setup will be, Ross, if Callum McGregor isn't fit enough to start? What do you think we'll be doing? And what do you think our setup will be?
I think just exactly what you've described there. I think Engels will slot into McGregor's position, and then I would guess Luke McCowan will move on to that sort of right side of the 2-3, however you want to position it. I'm not. It's funny. I put it in the Substack chat earlier on, a facility that obviously we have. If anybody's not familiar with it, there's a chat function. So I put it on and said, does anybody have any concerns? Anybody got any thoughts about the weekend? And one of the questions asked was, how would you feel if the midfield 3 was Engels, Hatate and McCowan? Personally, it wouldn't bother me. I'm quite comfortable with that, especially in a home game where I think obviously in theory we should dominate more of the ball. The one thing I like about Luke McCowan, probably more than any of our other midfielders, is having seen our patterns of play and having seen it broken down into all the Opta stats of the season, our movement from our own half into the final third, I would say, is 80% left and right. There's very, very little of what we do comes into the middle of the pitch on the initial pass into the final third. Luke McCann is the one player in the team that I think is probably more comfortable than any of them playing in that central area in that final third. And so I like the fact that if he was to be involved, if you're going to shut down wide areas, if you can get someone in that 10 space who is good at playing that short 5-6 yard pass into the box, there's no one better in our team than Luke McCann this season at doing that. Most of his assists have sort of come in that small area where it's just small little passes, 5-6 yards, linking in and around the edge of the box, centre between the goalposts, centre box, and in and around. And I really like that about Luke McCown. And I think if we were to move away from Cal McGregor, I'd be surprised if Callum doesn't start. I think he will absolutely nailed on to start. I wonder if there's a wee bit of gamesmanship, a wee bit of psychology involved in this. Who knows? But if Luke McCown starts, I think Hatate likes to drift to the left and then come in the way. Engels likes to drift to the right and play balls, sort of curve balls or play balls over at the far side. Luke McCown's the one that will sit in that pocket. And so that could potentially be a really good thing. But if Callum McGregor's fit, then you play Callum McGregor. That's a no-brainer. But I don't have any fears that if he's not fit, I think Engels drops into the pocket. You get the benefit of the fact that he's going to get the ball deeper, he's going to get more of the game in front of him, and he does have that wonderful range of passing, especially from right to left. And if you're looking at the fact that it's going to be Jota against either Tavernier or Sterling, whatever makeup, however they set up that 3 or whether they go back to a 4, I would like to think if we can find spaces in between the one person who's going to find those spaces in distance, and you described it against Seb's game. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it because I was away. But Engels is the player in our team who has that ability. So I think regardless of what we do in that midfield area, we've got players with quite different skill sets. And as long as we can get them into the areas where they can use their skill sets to the best of their ability, so whether it's McCann slotting, coming from the right and into the 10 as opposed to drifting out right, or if it's Engels playing deeper, or Hatate sort of coming in from that left to central role that he likes, quite happy with any of those. And then, as you said earlier on, you know, the one certainty you've got in amongst the whole team is we've got 2 good wide players. Kuhn prefers to cut inside, but both our wingers are happy to go to the line. You don't always do it. Kuhn is more inside than outside and then in. Jota's probably a wee bit more inside than outside as well, but they're both capable. And then with the fullbacks, if it's Schlupp and Johnston, you know that you've got 2 players who'll drive the byline. So the makeup of the team I'm quite at ease with. I think the only thing that will stop us in this game will be complacency and allowing ourselves to get dragged into a game that's not our game. We need to, that sort of cliche of make them play our game, because if we make them play our game, they cannot win without some sort of bizarre intervention. And I think if we do that, then, you know, so when you said
we've been talking about the makeup of the team. We've been making an assumption what our team is. So what do you think the Celtic team's going to be on Sunday?
I think Ross has just kind of said it. Like he's now settled on. It's very notable that there's now a Celtic starting 11. I haven't really had that for a long time. He's clearly a favoured first choice 11, which is what he played in Munich, what he played last Sunday, what I think, as Ross says, because I think McGregor will play. So it's what he'll play on Sunday again. Schlupp now he's dislodged Taylor. So it'll be interesting to see how much or little of Taylor we see in his last few months. Ironically, it was injury more than anything else, but we hardly saw anything of Kieran Tierney in his last few months. Well, for his first spell, at Celtic, and it's going to go the same way now. You're not going to see a lot of Taylor in the closing stages of this season, and he's pretty sure he's going to go in the summer. We all expect that. So, but you know, it's quite exciting. It's exciting to see Jota against Rangers at Celtic Park, because he had some terrific afternoons, and he seemed to really. I mean, he is a showman, as we've said. He's got an ego, which you need as a player like that. That's what you want in that kind of wide player. And this, he'll just revel in this. This will be the European games. Obviously, he'll have felt I'm back then, but he wasn't quite up to speed, and I still think he's still got a wee bit to go. But playing at home against Rangers, this, I'm back, baby. Like and watch out type thing. He'll probably be sitting in front of the mirror tonight, like working out different kind of goal celebrations. I can just imagine, or how his hair might flop a certain way,
It's interesting the point you make there about Greg Taylor, because that is something that managers seem to do. That when a player has decided, if they've been offered a contract and they decide they're going to go, managers seem to be quite almost huffy about it. You would think that they would take the attitude, well, he's here and I'm just wanting the best team. But you always get the impression that managers are like, all right, okay, you don't want to be here. Right, well, that's you.
Well, I spoke to somebody close to Greg Taylor this week, and it was interesting. And there's a kind of acknowledgement that what Schlupp gives Celtic, Greg Taylor simply can't. He simply doesn't have that physicality. And I've been a big Greg Taylor defender and supporter, and I think he's given a terrific contribution to Celtic. But I was even seeing it, my boy's been saying it for months, but you see it when Schlupp, just somebody who can handle themselves, who can handle the physicality. That's why, you see, Schlupp looks like a guy who's had a good English Premier League career, because he's got those attributes that you need. You absolutely need. He's solid and he's quick. And when Bailly didn't, to me, he wasn't an upgrade in Taylor, because he suffered from some of the same kind of no deficiencies, but shortcomings that Taylor. Whereas with Schlupp, I say, 6 foot plus and built, and quick over the ground. And the way he settled, you just think, God, that this is like a. Because watch it, I think we talked about it before, Brian, when you watched us with him, and he had a great game that night over in the Allianz against Bayern Munich, you think, God, Celtic have got defence. Because Trusty, that's the other thing about Trusty's not been very good since that Bayern Munich game, but Trusty's a guy who seems to need the big occasion as well to switch on, to really fully focus. Because his best games this season, Trusty, have been in Europe. I don't think he was in the team. He wasn't in the team. Was he in the?
He was on the bench at Ibrox.
That's what I was thinking. It's actually, you think it's not that
Engels
long
was
ago.
also.
Like January.
Engels was also. Was it?
He was also on the bench. Aye.
Also on the bench.
Yeah.
Trusty wasn't even on the bench. It was Ida and Engels were on the bench, and Trusty wasn't on the. Trusty wasn't even in the squad. He had the flu or something.
That's right. That's right. He was ill. So even you think, whatever Rangers thought that day and what they did and all that, this isn't the same Celtic. They're up against you think it's only, we're maybe talking 3 players difference, but that's a quarter of your team. You're talking Jota, Trusty, Engels, 4, and Schlupp.
Yep.
So 4 starters on Sunday didn't play in January.
Just to help with this, so the starting 11 that day was Schmeichel, Johnston, Carter Vickers, Liam Scales, Greg Taylor. Midfield was Hatate, McGregor and Bernardo. And then the forward line was Maida on the left, Furuhashi, Kyogo. Sorry, reading that is bizarre, saying Furuhashi, he's Kyogo. Anyway.
Yeah.
And
Unless
Nicholas,
you're writing, you always tell you, Ross, second names, you write the full name first and then the second names, rest of the piece.
I've said this to you. You keep me writing my punctuation and all these bits and pieces, and I'll stick to knowing the numbers that make up formations.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then that day, Val came on at the 65th minute, along with Luke McCann and Adam Ida, and then Engels came on in the 75th minute. Trusty was on the bench that day, along with Ralston, Louis Palmer, and Yang.
So, Louis Palmer had a good game last Sunday, mind you, didn't he, for Celtic?
So that compare the defence that will probably be starting on Sunday, Ross, with that defence in terms of, just the gut feel of Andrew and I is that Schlupp is an upgrade because he's just bigger and taller and stronger, and but you're looking at the numbers, so compare, and obviously anybody who listens to this will know that I would have either of you two ahead of Scales in at centre half, maybe a bit harsh, but just compare the numbers with that back four.
I understand. In terms of Schlupp versus McGregor, I think the comparison is fair. Is if you're going to play against a team who are a bit faster and a bit more physical down the side, especially the Bayern Munich game was the prime example. Michael Olise is one of the most informed players in Europe this season. Very quick, very powerful, everything that a modern winger pretty much should be. And Olise is, almost an identikit winger at this moment in time. If a manager wanted a winger and you said, well, name one of the best ones that you'd like him to be like, Olise would be one of those. And Schlupp dealt with that really well and was really switched on throughout that game. So in terms of pace and physicality, he is better than Greg Taylor in those areas. The one area that has concerned me a wee bit with Schlupp in recent times, and again, it probably goes to what Andrew says, is I sometimes wonder if the players have kind of, during this period where we're really far ahead, there's a motivational aspect, but there have been occasions with Schlupp and with Trusty, and to be fair, with Carter Vickers at times, where the dials went down a wee bit, and with Schlupp positionally, he's been caught a couple of times. What was the game that he scored? Was it Kelly? Midweek.
It
was at Dundee. There was a game. That was it. St Mirren midweek. He was awful, positionally hopeless. But yet, when he had the ball and driving the line, when he was going forward, he was great. But positionally, he was getting caught constantly. He was driving me insane. The changes sort of later in the game kind of changed that dynamic for us, and everybody improved when those changes were made sort of halfway through the second half. But he has had that a couple of times. He had it against Hibs as well in the Easter Road game. With a phantom ball over the line nonsense. He has had moments where positionally I think he kind of gets caught, but then I think that to an extent has to be accepted as part and parcel of us signing a guy who hadn't played as a left back for a long, long time. And so as much as he's still got that in his locker, there's still that sort of mental sharpness of, right, I can't necessarily always go marching forward. I need to, get my fundamentals right. I need to keep the winger outside me. The touchline, byline, sideline, whatever you want to call it, is almost like an extra defender. So, especially with Czerny on Sunday, I want to keep him out there. And if that means giving away the odd throw-in or whatever, as long as he's that side of me, I'm all right. Because, as you say, you know that Rangers aren't going to commit everybody forward to outnumber us in defence. But if you keep on allowing people inside you, and he has been guilty of it at times, you're then putting the emphasis on Trusty and everybody else to move over one to act as that bit of protection for him. And as Andrew said, Trusty at times, I'm still undecided with Trusty. At times I look, and Andrew's right, some of the bigger games he's played quite well, but then there's been other games where I've looked and went, you're at risk of getting a reputation of being a bit too soft. And I think that St Mirren game was
weak
one
as piss, according to his manager.
Yeah, St Mirren game was one. The Dundee game, people were kind of ruffling the feathers a wee bit with him. And, it's easy to say, oh, he's a big guy, he should just deal with it. And, that has to be part of your makeup and in your nature of, you can't give it back in the truer sense of the word, back in the 90s where you could rattle folk for fun. But, you need to make it known. You're not going to get any freebies against me. And that would be my only concern with those two, is that I think at times and they're capable of giving away a freebie. But I would say Carter Vickers this season, and I'm a huge fan of Carter Vickers, he's had that at times as well. The most consistent one of them all, who's pretty much been on it for, I'd say, 99% of the seasons, Alistair Johnston. But even he's had his, every defender has their wee moments, but the left side of our defence would worry me more than the right. And the fact that it's Czerny who's on that right side would be the area that I would have most, not cause for concern, but the area where I'd be drilling it into them and going, nothing for free. You give him nothing for free, you let him inside. If he comes inside, everybody, surround. If it takes two, if it takes three, you don't want him firing off shots around the edge of the box, because he does have that capability. And, as I say, I know that people like to go, oh, plays for Rangers, he's pish. He's not. He's good at what he does, and when he's allowed to get into those areas, he's effective. The solution, don't allow him into those areas. So those three, if it's Cal McGregor or if it's Engels, that little triangle, when the ball's on that side, they need to make sure, as I say, sounds really simplistic, but nothing for free.
But they'll be motivated. They'll be hugely motivated. You can tell Rodgers is hugely motivated because that really, really irritates him. What happened in January? I mean, he's kind of referenced it.
It
He
absolutely
wants,
should.
yeah, and he knows they weren't. They were a bit hit and miss when it came to the cup final as well. Could easily have lost that to Rangers. So he could have easily lost to Rangers twice in the space of a couple of weeks. A guy who'd only lost them once in nearly 3 years before that.
I mean,
see that would be my only concern. Would be that complacency or sort of going into the game, sort of just allowing yourself the time to build up in the game. They're going to come out flying because people will go, they're tired again having played Fenerbahce, but they won't be. For the first half an hour or so, they will have that, just the momentum of the fact that they've come out of that game, won penalties, that sort of sharpness of straight into another game. Their energy of the first 30 minutes, I think, will be fine. It'll be the latter part of the game that they would, you'd expect them to drop off. So we cannot afford to start the game sort of expecting them to be slower because they played 120 minutes. We need to start the game thinking they've come off, they're sharp, they're ready, they're going to have a desire because of the fact that it's Barry Ferguson. We need to match that and use everything that pissed us off for the game in January and fight fire with fire, I suppose, and bring so much intensity early on that they just anything that they have got left is zapped early doors.
Yeah.
And just hammer them early doors.
We were out last Friday, Andrew, and we talked about this a bit. Your point about Brendan and the need for revenge. We drew with Aberdeen 2-2 at Celtic Park, and everybody was like, oh, see, Aberdeen can compete with Celtic. For 10 minutes they competed, and that was it. We then went to Hampden and stuck 5-6 goals past them because Brendan wanted to demonstrate, how dare you think you're as good as us. And then Hibs beat us with the dodgy decision. And although it was only 2-0, we dominated that game so much last week. When we discussed beforehand, it was part of the principle of, how dare you think because you got a result against us that you can do something. And you're right, I think that'll be Brendan's attitude going into this game. How dare you think that Barry Ferguson, Alloa and Kelty Hearts manager can compete with me, Mr. Brendan Rodgers? How dare you think you can do that? I think I think that'll be his attitude going into the game.
But I mean, the staunch one might have been able to beat the special one, but he'll not be able to beat the beautiful one. That's what I'm saying anyway.
Do you know? There's someone friend of mine in football thinks Mourinho's great. Continually talks about how Mourinho talks about teams in transition, and loves the way Mourinho has a team in transition to do with midfield and stuff like that. And I sent him a message last night saying, what's this about teams in transition? Because I'm just watching Rangers, as you said earlier, Ross, the ball it was like a game of basketball back and forth. And he said, Mourinho's dialing it in. He's chucked it. He's just going through the motions there. You can just see that. And so your point about he might be able to do something about the special one, the chosen one, but I don't think Mourinho's putting his heart and soul into that stuff in Turkey. I think he's just picking up the cash because he can. Plus they won. I mean, that's the other thing that keeps getting missed in all this stuff. Fenerbahce won. Rangers lost their fourth home game. It's at Ibrox for the first time ever in either a club's history. Fourth home game in a row.
I know, it's unbelievable. Like when you talk about the furore about getting through, and you think, my God, you've just created that record. That record that's like, as I say, like talk about pissing in your strawberries. It's quite easy to piss in Rangers strawberries over that. And they were poor. They were really poor.
They were, and
they were poor.
But anyway, enough about them. So, want to keep this tight for the game on Sunday. Don't want the podcast to last longer than the game itself. We've got the game coming up. Ross, I know you don't like giving a score, but tell me what you think the team will be from Celtic and how you see the game going.
I think the team will be exactly the same as it was versus Hibs. I think McGregor will start. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. But if he doesn't, as I say, we've kind of covered that. I think Engels will slot in. How I see it going, I always think it's really, really hard to predict. I think the first 5 minutes is always key to these games. Start well, start with a real fire, start with a real speed of play, because I think that man for man, I believe that we are a better team. I think we have more in our locker. There's players with far broader skill sets in our team than that they have. I think regardless of whatever formation Barry Ferguson lines up with, whether he starts with 7 at the back, 9 up front, whatever it is, whatever he wants to blether about, I think we have the tools to deal with pretty much anything that they set up. And so for me, it is just first 5, 10, 15 minutes, get in, start with start like you mean to go on, and hopefully we get what Andrew started the podcast with, which is an emphatic victory. Emphatic to me doesn't necessarily always have to mean that you win by 2-3 goals, but I would like to see a real demonstration of what our players have. If that means that we win 1-0 and we have a bundle of shots and it's people blocking shots on the line, or whether it's Butland finally having a decent game against us, as long as we win, I'm good. But I would like to see us assert the sort of dominance, and you're saying that, Brendan will want to go into this game to prove a point off of the back, what was a poor cup final and then a bad loss at Ibrox. So I would like to see that pendulum swing back round to back in your boxes, go, Barry can have his wee game against us, and then he can, politely fuck off, back to wherever he came from, back to his daily record column, where he can talk about formations and his tactical nous, even though he's an absolute plum. But anyway, that would be and I don't do predictions, as you know. I want us to win one way or another.
Andrew?
Well, I'm predicting, I'm going for it. Like, I know I've probably said this and it's never quite turned out like this very often, but it's got to be another 3-0, isn't it? That'd be nice bookending the season with 3-0s over Rangers. I mean, the thing about this one is, it doesn't really matter. It matters and it doesn't matter. I mean, it will still ruin my Sunday if Celtic, in the very unlikely event they happen to lose, I'll still be stewing out over the week. But there's ones that mattered that Celtic lost 4, 5, 12 years ago that I can still get myself kind of angsty about. This won't be one of these, whatever happens.
All right, so you're going for 3-0. That's excellent. So we'll hold you to it. Anyway, with that, I will say, Ross and Andrew, thanks very much. Thanks for downloading and listening to this podcast. However, if you are a paid subscriber, keep listening.